What's going on, guys? My name's Chris Hill and thanks for watching this tutorial on how to edit photos in low light situations or night photography. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to take photos like these and turn them into photos like these. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to edit on Adobe Lightroom, which is the software that I'm using. But if you don't have Adobe Lightroom, then you can still apply these tips and tricks and tools that I use to whatever software that you use to edit photos. So let's go ahead and get this editing going. Alright guys, so the first thing we're going to do is fire up Adobe Lightroom. And for the sake of this tutorial, I already went ahead and imported the two photos that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of them and go over to Develop to bring our photos into our editing panels. And you can see along the right hand side that I have all the tools that I need to edit this photo. But before I begin editing these pictures, I am going to talk really quickly on shooting at night photography. I'm not going to get too deep into how to shoot photos at night because that's a whole nother tutorial on its own, but I am going to point out just a couple things real quick. So we have a photo here of my buddy Joey holding an iPhone in front of the World Trade Center located in the financial district of New York City. And when shooting at night or just in low light situations, the number one thing you want to look for is a light source. So in this case, I had the buildings in the background illuminating the frame along with the screen of the iPhone, helping bring in more light into the photo. So when you are shooting at night, make sure you find a light. It could be any light. It could be a car light, headlamp. It could be a lamp post on the street. It could be a storefront neon sign. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you have some sort of light source. And the next thing I want to point out are my camera settings that I took for this shot. So if we look up here in the top left corner, I have a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, an aperture of 3.2, and an ISO of 2500. And the focal length for my camera was 24 millimeters, taken on my 24-70 millimeter zoom 2.8 aperture G Master lens for Sony. And to quickly explain these camera settings I used, when I shoot at night, I always adjust the shutter speed and aperture first before adjusting for the ISO. And the reason being is that it really depends on the situation of the photo I'm trying to capture. So in this photo, I am holding the camera. I'm not using a tripod, which means that I generally tend to shake sometimes when I do take photos handheld, and it's also a really cold night out when I snap this, so that means I was shivering a little bit. So at 1/100th of a second, it was pretty comfortable to shoot at. It didn't produce any motion blur, and it allowed enough light into the frame. For my aperture, I had a low aperture at 3.2. Not only because it brought in the most amount of light, or almost the most amount of light, but because I wanted the iPhone in the photo to be in focus with the World Trade Center and buildings in the background to be blurred out. And the last thing I adjust for is the ISO. So once I have my shutter speed and aperture figured out, I then go ahead and adjust the ISO as needed. And I shoot on a Sony a7R III, and it's a pretty exceptional camera in low light situations, but I try not to bring my ISO over 4000. So after anything above 4000, it just produces too much grain that it's really hard to bring back in post-production. At 2500, it worked out pretty well, and it did bring in enough light to capture the details in the photo. Before I begin editing this photo, I just want to point out that not only am I going to show you guys how to brighten the photo and bring out the details, but I'm also going to color grade this photo to my style. So if you follow me on Instagram and you like the way my feed looks and the color grading that I do in my photos, you'll get a glimpse in here on how I do that and achieve the look that I always go for. To start off, let's go up to the temperature bar. Now, if you're not shooting in RAW, that's definitely a mistake. It's something that you should be shooting on in your camera, because if you're not shooting in RAW, you won't be able to edit your photo as well as it possibly could be edited. When you have a JPEG photo, it compresses the image and you can't affect a lot of the settings in post-production. So because this is RAW, I can go ahead to my white balance and temperature bar and adjust it as needed. So like I said, because this is RAW, I have my white balance on auto, and by having it on auto, it allows me to adjust the temperature in post-production, so it's not a huge concern when I am editing. However, if this was shot in JPEG, this is something you cannot change in post-production. I'm going to go ahead to the temperature and basically just slide this bar left and right and find the type of look that I kind of want. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this bar to the right, and that really adds this warm tone to the photo. And I kind of want it to be a little bit more blue, so I'm going to drag it slightly more towards the left, and I like that look right there. So next up, we're going to go to the exposure, and I'm going to drag this exposure bar to the right, and I think that's pretty good right there. Now, the one thing I want to point out, when you are adjusting exposure and you're bringing out the lights in a night photo, you will start to see a lot of grain, which is fine because this is something we can get rid of down the line also. Just keep in mind, even though you're adjusting the exposure and noise is showing up more, don't worry about it because we can eventually get rid of it. The other thing really quickly too is when I am editing this photo, I am going to be looking at the background of this photo. I'm not so much concerned about the iPhone screen. That's something that I could actually quickly adjust at the end, which you'll see. So when I am moving these tabs and adjusting the lighting and the coloring, I am focused on the background of the image. So let's move on to the contrast. I'm going to bring the contrast to the right and just darken some of these areas just a little bit, and that looks good. The next thing I'm going to do is go to the highlights. So when I'm editing a photo at night or in low light, I always drop the highlights because what this will do is really bring out the details in the lighting and get rid of a lot of overexposure. So I'm going to drop this down almost to probably all the way. We'll go to about 89, and you can see now all of a sudden these really nice bokeh circles from the lights are a lot more detailed. They're not overexposed, and I'll show you really quick. I'm going to drag it to the right and show you what it looks like if you were to brighten up the highlights, and all of a sudden we just kind of have this nasty clutter and overexposure in the photo. So that's why I always like to bring the highlights down when I am editing a night photo. Next thing I'm going to do is go to the shadows, and I'm going to bring out the shadows by dragging this bar to the right. And just keep in mind that I am eyeballing a lot of this. There's really no set numbers. Every photo I take is different, so that's why I don't really believe in presets. I have made my own in the past, but even still those don't work because I'm always shooting in different lighting situations. So this looks pretty good here, and I brought out a lot of the shadows in this building. So let's move on to the whites. Now the whites bar, what it does is it affects the color white in the photo, and that is a lot of these lights in the background. So I'm actually going to bring this up to about right here, and you can see how this is different from the highlights because all this did is brighten the whites, and in the lights back in the background you can see that these lights, these bokeh circles, still maintained their detail. All we simply did was just brighten the whites in them. Moving on down, I'm going to go to the blacks, and I'm going to drop the blacks down just a little bit to about, I think that's pretty good. So just making a slight adjustment here. And the next thing I'm going to do is go to clarity. I'm going to bump up the clarity to about 7 looks pretty good. And you just want to be careful when adjusting the clarity, because if you do bump it up too much, it does make the photo look really unrealistic and kind of makes it look like some sort of drawing or painting, but definitely doesn't look like a photo when you put it up too high. So I'm going to bring it back down to 7 just to really bring out a little bit more of the details in the photo. And really quickly, I'm going to show you the side-by-side comparison from the original to the edits that we have made so far. And you can see there's a huge difference already. We brought out the lights in the fog that were above the World Trade Center, a lot more detail in the sides of the building, and even the graffiti art located down in the photo. So that's what we've done so far. There hasn't even been any color correction. This has just been brightening up the photo at this point. Let's go ahead and pull this back up, and I'm going to scroll down to the transform tab next. And what I'm going to do is just straighten this photo. When you do straighten or rotate a photo, make sure you click constrain crop. What that does is when you rotate the photo, it keeps it within the frame. So I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this till the World Trade Center is straight, and I think that looks pretty good right there. Cool. So now we have a straight photo. I'm going to go up next to the detail tab and go down to the noise reduction and luminance bar, and this bar does get rid of the grain. So my general rule of thumb is I like to go to about 40 first when adjusting this for my night edits, and it's a pretty good starting point, and it does get rid of about 50% of the grain that I found in most night photos. But in this case, I think I might want to bump it up just a little bit more, probably to around 50, and I think that's good. And I could already see in the fog that a lot of the grain has disappeared. You want to also make sure that you don't do overkill with the noise reduction, because if you do, it kind of just smears the photo and ends up making it look like an oil painting, and all of a sudden his hand looks like a prosthetic limb. It just doesn't look good. So you want to find the sweet spot, and probably, like I said, I'm just going to bring this down to about, we could go to 55. I like that there. So we have an upright photo. We got rid of a lot of the grain. The next thing we're going to do is the color grading. And I'm going to scroll on down to the calibration bar. And this is one of the most effective tools in Lightroom that a lot of people don't even know about, or they simply just don't know what it does. And I'm going to show you right now and explain to you why, to me, this is the most powerful tool in Adobe Lightroom. So what the calibration tool does is you have the ability to change the red, green, and blue colors in every single pixel of the photo. Now, this is different than the hue, saturation, and luminance tab up here, because these colors, or these tabs, just directly affect every individual color. But in the calibration, you actually have the ability to affect the overall coloring of the image. So when I do use this tool, what I typically do is I slide the reds to the right and I slide the blues to the left, and you'll see the result of that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and slide the reds to about 50, and you can see how that's changing the colors in every color in the image. It's not just affecting the red, so it's literally bringing up the reds in every single pixel. And to combat that, you can go down to the blues and bring the blues to the left. I'm gonna go -50, and you can see how now the blues are more evident in the photo alongside the red as well. And I slid it to the left because I think the teal colors and the orange colors are complementary colors, and they look pretty good together. And that's the type of style that I always achieve for. And the next thing you want to do is you want to adjust the saturation of these, and a lot of this is just playing around to find a comparing color, or just colors that work together that best fit your style. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to desaturate the blues, and the difference of this and the hue, saturation, luminance tab is that I am desaturating the blue in every single pixel. I'm not just desaturating the blues where there is blue in the photo, because in every pixel there are all red, green, and blue colors. So I kind of like how this looks right now, and I'm going to go to the red and just kind of see what it looks like if I was to saturate this, or even if I was to desaturate it. And I don't like it desaturated, so I might just keep it. I'm going to bring these just around to 10. And I think that looks pretty good. So I like these colors, I like the oranges in here, and I like the blues. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to scroll up now to the hue, saturation, and luminance tab, where we now have the ability to adjust every single individual color that we like. So the first color I'm going to adjust is the blue saturation, and I typically like to have my blues desaturated. So I'm just going to see what it looks like when I bring these blues down just a little bit, and I think that's pretty good right there. So next up, I'm going to go to the luminance and go to blue. I'm just going to bring these blues up to make them a little bit lighter, and you can see this is affecting a lot of the white area because I am targeting the blue. So when you slide the blue bar to the right, it does tend to make whatever is blue white or just brighter. And then I'm going to go up to the hue and back to the blue bar, and I'm going to just bring this over to the left a little bit, and you can see if I was to drag it all the way to the left, it makes the image more like an aqua or like a teal. So I'm only going to bring it to about, I think -10 is cool, and I like the way this blue is looking. So after the blues, I'm going to go to the oranges, and I'm going to go over to saturation orange, and I'm going to bring that saturation up ever so slightly, but not too much. And I think that looks good there. And I'm going to see what it looks like when I adjust the luminance of the orange. And you can see in the buildings on the right hand side, it's making the lights pretty dark, almost too dark for me. If I bring it to the right, it's almost a little too bright. So I might just keep it how it is. I think that looks pretty good. And if we even wanted to, we can go up to the hue for orange and turn these oranges a little bit more into red by dragging that bar to the left. And again, I kind of like it how it is. So this looks pretty good to me. And the last thing that I'm going to do is adjust the exposure and highlights of the screen. So you can see how the screen is like pretty blown out. So one thing to do is you can go up to the brush tool, and I'm going to go to effect and hit the drop down bar, and then go to highlights. I'm going to go ahead and click the highlight button and drop those highlights down probably to around 60. I'm going to go ahead and click on this screen, and I'm simply just going to brush over this screen, and you can see how it already affected the brightness of the screen, and I can see a lot more of the details. It's not blown out anymore. And if that's not enough, you can go up to the exposure and drop the exposure to make it a lot darker and kind of match the background of the image. Then I'm going to go to clarity, just bump up the clarity of the screen ever so slightly, and because the background is a little bit more orange than the phone screen, what I'm going to do is go up to temperature and just make that slightly more orange so it is consistent with the background. And boom, there we go. And that is a good looking photo right there. One last thing, if there still is too much grain in the photo, what you can do is go back up to the brush tool, go to effect, hit the drop down bar, and you can go to noise or clarity and simply click on the areas you want to denoise and just kind of scrub over that area where there is a lot of grain. If that still isn't enough, you can also go ahead and go to the clarity slider and drop that clarity down, which will just kind of smooth out some of those areas. And there you have it. This is a good looking photo. And if you do want to have this ready for Instagram, you can go up to the crop tool, and you want to go to where it says original and go down to 4:5, and that'll bring up the frame size that is set for Instagram. And just go ahead and click done, and there you go, there you have it. So I'm going to show you the original versus edited version right now. And there you have it. So a lot brighter. We got rid of a lot of the grain and noise that was an issue when we exposed the photo, and we color corrected it to at least the style that I like for my Instagram feed. So hope you guys like this edit and found it helpful, and let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Alright, and for this next photo, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I will be utilizing the same exact tools that I just did in the last photo. So really quickly, I just want to point out my camera settings that I took for this photo. If you go up here to the top left side, you can see that my shutter speed was at 1/400th of a second, an f-stop of 6.3, and an ISO again of 2500. So in this particular photo, I was on the New York City tramway, which is essentially a giant gondola or ski lift that takes you from Manhattan to Roosevelt Island, and it cuts right along the Queensboro Bridge, suspended over this really cool street. So since I was moving pretty fast, I needed to keep my shutter speed pretty high to not have any motion blur in the photo. So that's the first thing that I adjusted for when I was taking the shot. And the second thing is the aperture of 6.3. So there is quite a bit of depth in this photo, and I wanted to make sure that I had everything focused. So that was the reason for the 6.3 aperture. And like I was saying in the last one, it just all depends on the situation that you're in and the type of photo that you're trying to capture. And the last thing I adjusted was the ISO, which was at 2500, which was within my range of 2000 to 4000 ISO that I try to keep when shooting in the low light situations. To start off, you can see that this photo is much brighter. This wasn't taken at night, but it was at sunset. So it is very dark, and you can see there's no direct sunlight on the photo, with the exception of the sun setting in the background. So let's go ahead and get this one started. First thing I'm going to do is go up to the temperature bar, and I'm going to slide that to the right to bring in a warmer tone to this picture and really bring some details out into the buildings. Right around there looks good. Next thing I'm going to do is bring up the exposure. And you can see it's bringing in a nice amount of light, and I don't see too much grain. The only grain I'm really seeing is in the shadowy areas, which is the area that you are going to see grain when you are editing a photo in low light. So this looks pretty good. I'm going to go over to contrast, bring the contrast up ever so slightly. Looks good. And then I'm going to go to the highlights, and of course, like I did in the last photo, I'm going to drop these highlights. Moving on to shadows, I'm going to bring these shadows up just to expose some more detail. And if you can see closely, the bottom area of the screen, which was the darkest portion of the photo at the beginning, does have some grain in it. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as we continue editing. For the whites, I'm going to play around with this. I might not mess with this too much and just see what it looks like as I go through it. But I could go either way. I'm pretty indifferent on the look. So we'll go to around 40 and just leave it there for now. We can always come back and change that. Moving down to the blacks, I am going to go to the blacks and just drop these blacks just a little bit again, and looks good. Moving down to the clarity, I'm going to bump the clarity up probably to around 10, and by bumping that up, it really starts bringing in a lot of the details in these windows and the buildings, which I am currently looking at and have my eye on. Okay, so moving on down, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the calibration tool again. I'm going to go ahead, slide that red over to the right. I'm going to go about, let's go about 50. Yeah, that looks good. And onto the blues, and I'm going to bring that over to the left. And looks pretty good. I like these colors a lot. So you can see the sky got very blue. These oranges in the light really started popping out, and just an overall cool tone. So I'm going to mess around with the saturation next and check out what it looks like when I bring up the oranges. And almost looks a little too blue, but I'm going to keep it there and then go down to the blue saturation and drop these down. And this looks pretty cool, and I like the way this is looking with these blues all the way down. So I'm going to go back up to the red saturation and see what it looks like when I lower it. And I kind of like this look a lot. I'm going to leave this here and then just go up to the hue and just really bring out these oranges just a little bit more. And cool. Gonna go back to saturation real quick. Might pump back in some orange there. Awesome. And I think this looks good. So next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go up back to the, I'm gonna go to the detail tab and reduce the noise in this photo, which the majority is in the lower half, which is where the shadows were in the beginning. So I'm gonna bring that up to about 40 again. And just to get a closer look, I'm going to go up and click this crosshair button and just kind of point it on an area that has the most grain. This looks pretty good. And I'm just going to maybe bring this up just a little bit more and keep my eye on that little square. Cool, and I really like this. We already got rid of almost all the grain down here. So moving on to the next part will be the HSL, and I'm going to start with the blues just like I did in the last photo and bring these blues down and desaturate them just to around here. I think this is pretty cool, and it's adding a very gray look to the photo, and I like this a lot. I'm going to go down to the luminance blue. I'm going to bring these down and see what that looks like, and it darkens the sky a lot, but I'm not sure if I like that entirely, so I might just bring it up to about here. I think this is pretty good. Next, I'm going to go to the hue, and I'm going to bring the hue to the blue, not too much actually, because I don't want it to look kind of teal, so I think I'll leave it right around there. Next, I'm going to go to the oranges and saturation, and I'm going to bring up the saturation in the oranges probably to about 33. That looks good. And then I'm going to go to the luminance and mess around and see what it looks like when I increase these oranges. So I actually really like when these oranges are super bright because it really stands out in these buildings. So I'm going to keep that like that. Next up, I'm going to go to the orange hue, and I'm going to bring these oranges a little bit more towards the red side. And if you see my photos, like I said earlier, on Instagram, I do have quite a bit of orange or orange-red hue, which is exactly how I achieve that look, which is sliding this orange hue over to the left and more towards the reds. And this looks pretty good, and honestly, this is an exact replica of what I would post on Instagram. So here it is, and here's the before and after of the original and the final edit. There you go. So you can see this photo was very blue, very dark down here on the original on the left hand side. And on the right hand side, we really brought out the shadows and the details down on this highway ramp, along with brightening the lights inside the buildings and even brightening up the sky, and that was achieved by desaturating the blues and getting rid of a lot of blues, but it is still slightly evident in the photo, just it's not as overpowering as it was in the original. So there you go, and hope you guys enjoyed this quick edit, and here is the final result. Alright guys, that's a wrap, and thanks for watching this tutorial. If you found it helpful, go ahead and hit that subscribe, like, and comment button so I know that you guys enjoyed it. And also let me know what type of tutorials you guys want to see in the future so I could go ahead and make those for you guys. So peace out for now, and thanks for watching.